and welcome everybody. Good to see you all. So I am Rachel Anderson. I'm a leadership coach, executive coach. I have my own personal development company called Tea and Empathy, all those usual labels that we have. I also call myself a social introvert. I'm mum to 3 grown daughters. My middle daughter's just flown off to Canada, so I'm feeling a little bereft. I'm feeling like, oh, I'm entering a whole new phase of them all being grown up. I've also written a book on introversion and leadership, being a social introvert, and various other things as well. But I'm very happy to talk to you about practical ways to expand our perspectives, thinking and creativity. But I'd love to hear in the chat, which won't be part of the recording, what drew you to this and whereabouts are you calling in from? So if you're prepared to put in the chat where you are and what it was that drew you to this session, it would be really helpful for me, just to have a sense of what the interest is, what piqued your interest to come along today. And why this subject? Why did I want to bring this subject up? And it's because we often get stuck. We get stuck in particular patterns of doing things. We get stuck feeling like we can't break out. And we have lots of assumptions and stories about creativity. Oh, I'm seeing some of the things that are coming in here now. Some lovely stuff. Yes. It's something that we encounter as coaches with clients who feel that they're struggling with creativity, something that's always being said as something as a, if you're looking at innovation, creativity, breakthrough thinking, then people can get very much in their own heads about worrying what they're able to do. Ordered to attend. Oh. Always happy to have people who've been frog marched here. Yes. Oh, Eastern Algarve, very nice. Inspiration for own development. Yes, absolutely. When I ran this session or something similar to it a year ago. I used to do a regular series of webinars, and what I loved about doing those was in the process of preparing for them, I would gain so many new insights and learning as well. And I was particularly inspired as I started to prepare for this, which is why I wanted to run it again, because it was so much fun. But I'd love to know, what does creativity mean to you? What do you think creativity is? When you think about creativity, what immediately comes to mind? And you might also want to add, do you think you're creative? Quite often when people come along to these, it's because they think they're not terribly creative. Ideas and fun. Stepping outside normal thought patterns. Yes, stepping outside normal thought patterns. I really like that. It is that there is something around, our assumptions from when we grow up is often like, I'm not creative because I can't draw or I don't play an instrument. But actually something in creativity is just around how we put things together in a new way. It doesn't even have to be original. It's because what is original under the sun? That's always just around something new, a new creative, a new pattern that we put together. And as I was preparing around creativity, it suddenly struck me in that way when it's so obvious when you've got it, but I hadn't properly appreciated it before, just how creative a process coaching is, just how much creativity there is. Because at the end of the day, what is coaching about, if not about providing the right conditions in which new neurological connections can be made, the new insight, that new perspective, that new way of seeing things. I'm just pausing again as I'm saying some of these things. Problem solving, absolutely. When I hear from clients that I'm not very creative, and we start to explore it, we find that actually they're incredible problem solvers, that when they apply it in the context of their work, then there's all kinds of different things they do in terms of how they resource, in how they look ahead for their strategic planning, in how they line up what they need to be able to get done in very creative, thoughtful, resourceful ways. But they never think about that as creativity, because fundamentally, it's like, oh yes, but I can't draw for toffee. And I have to say, I used to be the same. I used to think, because my sister was very good at drawing and I could never match what she did. And my best friend in primary school wrote these most wonderful stories that always got read out in class. And more to the point, she could illustrate them as well. I was very jealous because she was brilliant at drawing all the Mr. Men in a way that would just, I was so envious of that. And so I came up with that story myself, that I wasn't particularly creative. And of course, it's taken me many years to realize that's not true. And the irony is, of course, in creating that story, that's creativity. Every single human being is creative because we take points of data and we create a story about what those points of data mean. So if we have an imagination, no matter how vivid we think it is or otherwise, we are creative. I don't know, is anybody here a bit of a worrier? Anybody notice that they worry a bit? I found a wonderful quote that basically says, worry is a misuse of imagination. Worrying in itself is a creative process because we are making up a story about things. Our imagination is running wild with all the what ifs. That is creativity. It might not necessarily help us, but it is creative. I'm pausing again, looking at some of these things. Yes, thinking differently, reframing, absolutely. Innovation, original. Yes, there is something in the kind of novelty. I struggle a little bit with the word original because it feels like it puts pressure on us. It puts that pressure on us that somehow it's not valid unless no one else has thought about it ever before. And underneath what gets in the way of our creativity is that fear that it won't be good enough, that actually what we do isn't enough. And so that often stops us putting something into practice altogether. As coaches, we know when people are stuck, it can be a question of skill or it can be a question of will. It can be, how are we getting in our own way? What are the stories that we're creating? What are the fears that we're holding that mean we don't step into a place which feels too vulnerable or feels too scary, or where we have a story that that's something that we can't do? And alongside that, sometimes it is just a question of, do we have the skills that we need to help us to do that? The paradox of creativity, which feels like it's open and free, is that structure is such an enabler to creativity. And when we know some of those structures, then it can really help us. I'm going to share my screen as a little example of this. I still can't draw, but if I were to want to learn to draw, I suddenly realize that there are structures that can support us in understanding how to create something, that actually we can use tools and frameworks and exact models that can help us create something. So I know then that actually there's a starting point of something that I could go away and learn. Let's stop sharing there. I don't like doing slides and having lots of things, but I will share a screen a couple of times just to illustrate a point. So what I want to share today are some of the tools and techniques and structures and enabling ways I found over the years to unlock my own creativity, to learn how to step into new ways of thinking, some of which are things that you might use with your clients already in terms of how we reframe. Other things are just fun tools and techniques to play around with. But again, I would love to hear if there are particular tools you use. Put them in the chat because we can share a resource with each other. And at the end of the session, I'll share a couple of links because I have a free resource hub, which has got lots of different subject matters in it as well. But this is where I squirrel away all the things that I find helpful and freely share. All it costs you is your email address to be able to access the platform. But I'll share that at the end of the session, how you can go in there, because I've collected a number of different techniques. And there is a recording of the last time that I ran the session. This one's going to be a little bit different because I will touch on some AI tools, because in that beautiful combination and collaboration between human creativity and structure, then artificial intelligence can be a great way to bring out the best of both. So I will share with you a couple of great AI tools because I'm getting very excited about the impact of AI and also the implications for coaching as the industry moves forward. But that's another topic for another day. I will come back to creativity for today. So there's that oft-used adage of, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you always get. It's often attributed to Henry Ford, but it wasn't him that said it at all. Apparently it's possibly a woman called Jessie Potter was the first accredited person, but there you go. I must go, who's Jessie Potter? But apparently she was the first recorded person to have said that saying. So it is around what structures and approaches can we take to move forward with old problems in new ways? How can we break out of those patterns of assumptions and the way that we think into something that feels new and fresh, that we put together things in a different way? I remember many years ago, way before I was a coach, in my first career, which was forestry. You can probably tell by all the trees behind me that my first career was growing trees, and my very corny line is I moved from growing trees to growing people. But I still use trees quite a lot. But we were there as our gruff practical foresters, thinking that creativity didn't have much to do with anything. And I went with a colleague onto probably the most inspiring course I ever went on, which was around creative problem solving. And my colleague was a very gruff, cynical forester who thought this was a whole pile of nonsense. But his views changed by the end of it when we found some very practical ways forward for dealing with some tangible issues. We were dealing with the big project, which we found was having great highs and lows for us as a team that we were struggling to deal with, that it was full of adrenaline and we'd be on a great high, and then it was really hard and we'd slump down, and we were struggling to maintain our motivation and keep going and deal with these big highs and lows. And we were introduced to a concept of a blind walk, which is a way to do a force metaphor, where you take your partner, you blindfold them, and then you lead them on a walk. First, you'd set what your inquiry question was. So what is it, the problem you want to solve? For us, it was, how do we deal with these highs and lows? And then you put the question to one side and just get into your body and your senses, having been deprived of one sense. So this forester companion of mine, I led through the Forestry Commission offices. We were on the 4th floor, led him to the lift, down out through reception. Everybody thought we were crazy anyway. It's like, what on earth are these people doing? I led him out through the back door onto an old railway line. It was now just a cycle path. It was a beautiful sunny day. And as I was walking along, he was noticing, as we moved through the shadows and the light, even though he was blindfolded, he could feel the difference in the heat. He could feel the difference. He noticed the difference in the light, even through the blindfold. He could hear the bird song. He was noticing everything. And then I led him back upstairs into the office, took the blindfold off, and he captured on a flip chart everything that he'd noticed on the walk, all these different facets. Just everything he could think about. And then we thought, okay, so how do these things relate to the problem that we have? And then it became clear that that movement between the light and dark was like the light and dark, or the highs and lows that we were experiencing. The bird song was actually similar to listening to the chatter of the grapevine of where people in the organisation were regarding the project that we had, in how you keep your ear to the ground of what was going on. He noticed how much he trusted me in leading through this process, leading him through when he couldn't see anything. And so it came a real clarity of, actually, we just need to trust in each other and lean on each other as we go through this process. And in the end, we came up with 5 core principles that we would have as part of our team to keep us going strong through the next 2 years of the project. And they stood the test of time from this one walk, that it helped us remind each other that actually there will be highs and there will be lows, but it's all right, because we'll keep going through, because we've got each other to trust on. We can listen to what's going on, we can stay connected, and it will all be all right. And indeed it was. So it was just one application as a small indication of the kind of thing you can do using a false metaphor to help you think about something, to help you surface what actually you are aware of on a subconscious basis, but have never been able to bring to your conscious awareness. So there's one technique, a blind walk. You need to think about safety and context, but it can be good fun. What else can we do in order to create a good structure? There are processes where actually sometimes we need to be able to diverge our thinking and then converge again, to diverge and converge. And the problem can often be, as the guy who was taking this course that I was on 20 odd years ago, he would say, premature evaluation prevents conception, which stayed with me ever since. And it is so true that we tend to leap in to evaluate what we're thinking about far too soon and constrain what we're thinking about. And one way to break out of that is to use the classic, what's called the Disney process, because it's what Robert Dilts codified that Disney used to create their storylines, which is the concept of having 3 actual or metaphorical rooms to go through. The first room is the dreamer room. This is the place for the dreams. All that is allowed to happen in the room is to dream, as big and as wide and as rich and as crazy as you like, to dream all the possibilities with no evaluation, no criticism allowed within that room. That space is pure dreaming space. And when you feel you have a dream to play around with, then you can take it to the next room, which is the realist room. So here's the dream. How might we be able to bring this into reality? And this is where they start to storyboard, or this is where you can start to look at the plans of how do we capture this dream, what are the different facets, how will we anchor it in reality. What's not allowed to happen in the realist room is to criticize the dream or to question the dream. It is simply around looking, how do you bring that dream into reality? And then the third room, again, a separate space. This is the place for the critic. This is the place to look at. So from the realist plans, what could go wrong? What's not going to work within it? What is unrealistic? What are the constraints that are going to be around? But you'll notice the critic room is nowhere near the dream. Nowhere near the dream. You need to keep those far, far apart, because there is nothing more damaging than bringing criticism into a dream before it's even had the possibility of flourishing. So 3 separate spaces to consider the dream, to bring to reality, and then to look at the criticism. And we start to see the parallel with coaching here, because what's one of the fundamental facets of coaching, which is to hold a space of unconditional positive regard, to be able to suspend the judgment, to be able to hear where people are fully. Creativity requires structure the right structures that enable, and it requires the right conditions. And criticism is not going to be the place in which creativity will often flourish. So how we keep criticism away from that place of creativity matters. And that's how we can see some of our roles within coaching. I'd love to hear in the chat thoughts, what strikes you. I've shared so far a blind walk, the Disney process. Have you heard of these before? Are you aware of them? So do give me something in the chat. Another classic approach is de Bono's 6 thinking hats. How do we break out of our patterns of thinking? By thinking in a different way and to bring in different facets. Now, again, first we need the topic. What's our inquiry? And I'd love if you think for yourself, not that you need to share here at all, what are you wrestling with at the moment? What are the questions that you have at the moment? For me, I know what's very live for me is my health and fitness as I'm a full-on menopausal woman struggling with the change in my body shape and not responding in the way I once did. So this is a very live inquiry for me about what I can do with my health and fitness as I move into my later, more mature years. And so, of course, you don't have to have the hats, but it makes it more fun if you have them. We can start to look at this issue from a number of different perspectives. So the first hat, the white hat. This is the place of information and data. So this is the first place to look of, okay, what do I know? What are the facts? So I have the data about what I weigh, what I eat. In this perspective, in thinking in this way, that's what's prompted me to get a watch so I can measure my steps and other aspects of health. It's got me looking at a Zoe app, so I'm gathering more data around how I respond to food. This is the place which is like, give me some data that I can work with. So from a cold fact and figure place, it's the white hat of what I can do around my inquiry. A second hat, and I'm a bit sad about this because my daughter has this really lovely dreamy hat, green hat, but I think she must have taken it with her on to Canada anyway. So this is a bit browny green, but this is a green hat. The green hat is for creativity. This is a place for coming in a much more alternatives, ideas, possibilities, all kinds of different lateral thinking approaches, which we can use some of these other techniques in. And so in this space, I might do some of the techniques like, let's flip some assumptions. So here I am thinking I want to lose weight. What if I flip that assumption? What would I be doing if I wanted to really gain lots of weight? What would I be doing? And if I stop brainstorming all the stuff I could do to pile on the weight, it starts to illuminate some of the things I may be doing already that kind of contribute to that. If I start actually thinking, okay, I'll let go of the assumption I'm going to lose, let me flip it on its head and think, how do I gain loads of weight? And play around with that idea. And it starts to get a very different perspective. I might write a poem about how I feel. I don't know. I use other techniques like magnetic poetry. I've got some on board behind me of putting words together in different ways. So we can play around with different, more creative possibilities that are just playful and fun and maybe a bit more childlike. I see somebody put about watching children play in the chat. And this is so true. When that freedom without the fear of it not being enough. And here is a place where we can play with the green hat, even if it's not quite as dreamy as the one I'd hoped to have. So the green hat. The next hat. Now it's fallen on the floor. Another of my daughter's hats that she knitted herself. It's a red hat. She's quite creative. So this one is for feelings. So how do I feel about this? What does this topic make me feel? So I notice I feel some frustration. I feel some shame, which is interesting to explore. When I start thinking about my health and fitness, I notice the shame that comes up. I also notice if I think about being really healthy and fit, there's part of me thinks, oh, how boring. And then I get a real insight of, is that what's holding me back? Is that actually because I feel I will be boring if I'm fit and healthy? That's interesting. So, red hat, place of emotions. Then, black cat. This one is the place of caution, critical thinking, why something won't work. And I can start thinking about, well, do you know, there is also a piece that it is true that you are actually just getting older, Rachel. There is something around the fact that perhaps I ought to accept there is something of that. But this is the place of thinking, however, if you don't do something about your visceral fact, what's the impact on your heart? And I can start thinking from the black cat of all kinds of cautionary, critical, and scary things, actually. But this is the place of possibly the cynic and why something might not work, and of a little more critical thinking. Then we have, now I don't have a yellow hat, but I do have a rainbow hat. So this is my yellow, cheerful, optimistic, positives, plus points, and just sunny way of looking at stuff. So in this sunny way of thinking about my health and fitness, I'm thinking, actually, do you know, I could have quite a lot of fun, and think how much energy I'd have, and think how many other things I'll be able to do if I'm feeling healthier and fitter. Thinking about how I'll be feeling about myself and my self-esteem. I'll be optimistic about all the positives and what we can take forward. My yellow, but in this case, rainbow hat, also knitted by my daughter. And my final hat, my blue hat, bluish. This is process hat. This is thinking about, okay, planning for action. How, a little bit like the realist room. How do I put plans in place to make this happen? This is the place where, okay, so I've got a plan to go to the gym on these days. I've scheduled it into my diary. This is how I'm doing my food planning. This is the processes that I'm putting in place. This is the accountability I'm putting in place. This is what I'm going to actually do, the process to bring it into action. So you can see that in just looking at one object, one inquiry question from these 6 different perspectives, all kinds of things come through. So a good structure, but it's that kind of perceptual positioning, shifting around from different perspectives, different ways of being, to give a much more holistic view and approach, and breaking out of patterns. De Bono's 6 thinking hats. Lots more fun if you actually have hats, but you don't have to. I used to, when I was doing this project, I'm talking about 20 years ago, we had a set of party hats that we'd made up, and we would pass them around. And when we were in discussion, we would grab hats or make each other shift hats. And you know that if you have a particular way of being, that you are generally quite optimistic, then try pushing yourself to wear a hat that's less useful, less used by you. And similarly, if you tend to be a little cynical, try on one of the other hats, or try, if you tend to be quite facts and figures, go for emotions. So you can push yourself out of your normal comfort zone to think in a different way. Yes, indeed. The judgment in terms of my health and fitness does go deep. However, unless I look at that judgment and where it's there, I won't find the way through. So yes, thank you for your support. So, De Bono, Disney, force metaphors. There are other ways of doing force metaphors as well. This is one of the ways in which I use tarot. I don't approach tarot as in a, ooh, this is the way to look into the future or tell me my destiny. But I do find looking at the imagery and what the cards represent is a great way of bringing out, oh, I wonder how this applies. I think that's the fascination of tarot. You can use it to provoke a way of thinking because effectively it is a force metaphor. And so I grabbed one of my favorite tarot decks just coming out and drew a card at random, and the one I drew in, this is the Wildwood Tarot, which is a particularly beautiful one. Tree. I thought, how apt. Beautiful tree, and it's the 10 of Stones, which represents home. And I was thinking, so how does that apply? And I thought, well, my body is my home. I live in my body. And if I start thinking about my body as my home, what shifts in me in how I approach my health and fitness? So, useful card. Again, force metaphor. Let me know in the chat which ones you're liking most at the moment. Flipping assumptions, 6 thinking hats, tarot. I was thinking of doing a Coaching York session when we do our meetups on coaching with tarot, actually. So let me know if you're interested in that, because I've got lots of tarot decks and we can have lots of fun in that space. There's the yes, please. Yeah, I think I'll just need to find a good date to do that. So we've got a number of different principles that are emerging from this, a kind of process that we can go through, that we can support ourselves or clients with. Number one is, what's the inquiry? What issue? What's the question that you're bringing in? Are you clear on that? Number two, create the right conditions. And the first thing is suspend judgment. Give yourself permission to play. Suspend judgment about how good or bad. Give that place of unconditional positive regard for openness of possibility. Then we've got how to explore from different perspectives. When we're stuck with seeing something this way, how do we begin to move around, look from different frames, free ourselves to start gaining a different perspective? And as coaches, we know lots of different techniques for doing that, whether it's full-on perceptual positioning, whether it's a constellation. All these are great ways. These are creative ways of helping people to shift perspectives. Then we have the piece around noticing the assumptions, noticing the stories, noticing what's sitting underneath. Notice how we're putting together that data. What is the assumption or story that we're putting between the data? Like me suddenly noticing my assumption that if I am fit and healthy, I will be boring. Where did that come from? Somewhere along the line, I don't know. Now, I'm not going to change that overnight, but in me having unearthed it, then I can start to show myself the evidence of where that's not the case. We've got the place of looking for cognitive, emotional, and physical data. This is where we can start to do the challenging. If we notice what the data is, as well as the story, then we might find a different story to put that data together. We might have more data that we're able to access. We can go through the process of diverging and then converging, this process of gaining more insight, immersion, possibility, and then bringing it back to something that's more tightly defined. And then we might need to bring it back out again, and then bring it more back to something more tightly defined. This process of diversion, conversion is a very creative process. And it's like inspire, expire. It's like the in-breath, the out-breath. It's such a natural rhythm for us. Again, we can learn from nature of that. Expand, contract, expand, contract. You know, living itself is a creative process. And then we've got the underlying principle of don't evaluate too soon. Premature evaluation prevents conception. If we come in with that judgment, we preclude all kinds of other possibilities. Other techniques, collage. putting things together in a way you wouldn't otherwise necessarily expect. Or, and this is where we're going to have a little bit of fun, we can start looking at using AI, because it's one of my best friends at the moment, which makes me sound very sad. I don't know if anybody here has been playing with ChatGPT, but it's become a real boon to me. It's, you know, as a solo person in their business who wants to bounce ideas around, ChatGPT is great. Now, you can't believe everything it says. You have to check it. You really have to check it. But it's great to have a conversation with. So a quick kind of like hands up or in the chat, who's here has used ChatGPT? Great, Alex. Yeah. Let me know how you're finding it, what you're using it for. But I'm going to share my screen. Because I thought to play with it beforehand, I thought, oh, if I'm going to do a session on creativity, let me talk to ChatGPT about creativity. So first of all, I asked it about defining human creativity. I thought it was a bit wordy. And I didn't agree with all of it, because you know what I think about original, you know, generate, develop, express original, valuable ideas, concepts, or solutions by transcending existence patterns of thought, perception, or behavior. Complex and multifaceted process. I was thinking it sounded a bit jealous here, because ChatGPT's and AI very clear that creativity is one of those things that humans do so well. And then I thought, okay, write me some poetry. So write me a short, poignant poem about human creativity. And it came, I thought, that's not very short, but actually it's quite an interesting, you know, it tends to make things rhyme unless you tell it not to. In the forge of dreams, we mould our fate. A flame ignites imagination innate. And then I thought, yeah, write a shorter one, and do it in the style of Mary Oliver. I love Mary Oliver's poetry, you know, being from forestry background and loving nature. And I did like this one. In nature's arms, we find our spark. A gentle touch ignites the dark. Through leaves and stones, the whispers start. In quiet breaths, our art departs. Gifts of the wild, souls to mend. Creativity, our constant friend. Now, it might not be the best poetry in the world, but as something that it came up in like 3 seconds, I think that's quite good. And what I find is that in using the kind of, I wonder what ChatGPT would come up with, it sparks all kinds of ideas in me. The other thing that we can play with, of course, is actually in generating art. I often get really frustrated that I can conceive of something, but I can't execute it myself. And so then if I play with something like Dream AI, then I can create artwork in the style of something. And then again, use it as a metaphor to see what it provokes. So if I put creativity, let's go for poster art. Let's see what it creates. Interesting art that it's just generated. Can you see that okay? And again, it's like, okay, so I've just put in a word and a prompt. As I look at that image that it's just generated, what does it make me think? How does it apply? I was putting in around creativity rather than health and fitness, so it's not my current inquiry. But I'm interested in the dimensions of it, the pieces that it's put into it, the use of the colours. It starts to make you think of all kinds of different things. And we can start to see how we might use this with clients there and then, generate something together. I'd love to know, I'll say it's a separate topic, but I'd love to know how you're using AI. If you as a coach, you're using it, technology in your coaching to help with clients. Yes, there is a lot of controversy around ChatGPT about using it with homework and all those things. I'm finding it's an accelerant. It means that the kind of thing that might take me 2 hours. If I collaborate with AI, then that can take me maybe 15 minutes. But equally, it just helps organize my thoughts when I'm feeling scattered. So there's lots of different ways of using it. And it's meaning that I'm feeling more sparky and more creative by being able to bounce things off. Basically a machine. And to me, it kind of epitomizes in creativity that sense of how do you get structure and data and then play with the spaces in between. And using something like AI allows kind of that structure and frees me to be more creative. So another idea. So I want to pause there. I don't know, and perhaps we might pause the recording so we can have a very open discussion and come back to what you might take away and apply. So thank you. Yes, this is my summarising what we discussed while we paused the recording. So we were talking about some other great examples from the wisdom of the people here on the call of techniques. And there was a great technique for around 5 parallel universes to be able to take people through, particularly in the context of career, and other ways that we might use the 6 thinking hats. We're talking about collage. I was describing a box of sensory metaphors that I sent to people. So we were just bouncing around the different ways in which we use tarot or cards or different things to take on a different perspective, to just shake up out of our normal patterns of thinking, to bring in something a little fresh that might provoke us in themselves, just to expand our ways of thinking in more creative ways. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you all today. There will be the recording of this, and I will put in the chat the links to where you can find out a little bit more. If I put them, well, when we stop recording, I'll put them in the chat, so I'm not rabbiting on the recording. But thank you all. Thank you for coming on and supporting Coaching Week. I hope you got some value and we can stay on to discuss for a little longer. Thanks.
Thank you very much.